Hello everyone, so happy to have you here. This video we are going to dive into and workshop a couple different postures that you can do that target the different layers of the pelvis so that you have some coordinated movement depending on what stage of labor that you're at. So if you didn't watch the previous video about the layers of the pelvis, about the joints within the pelvis, I definitely suggest taking a peek at that before diving into this movement, just so you have a little bit of a baseline of how and why we're doing all of this. Otherwise, if you feel like you just want to jump right in and do some movement, that's totally fine too. You'll need a couple things for your practice today. Grab a yoga mat or some kind of exercise mat. If you don't have either, just maybe being seated on a rug or a carpet, something that'll feel comfortable for your knees and for your body. And you can always grab an extra towel or blanket for your knees. I don't have my yoga blocks with me. They're at my yoga studio. And so I literally have this wooden block that I found at my house. So something like this works. You can grab some big textbooks, anything like that if you don't have a set of yoga blocks yourself. And then also some kind of bolsters or pillows. I just have some pillows for myself. So I grabbed two just because they're a little bit on the thinner side. And that should be great. If you want to set some music, kind of set the mood of the room, light some candles, just make it a really nice space for yourself as we jump into some breath, jump into some movement. So we're going to start with breath. Go ahead and grab either your block or your bolsters and put them on the center of your mat. You want something high enough that's going to really elevate your hips higher than your knees, so that as you're seated, your pelvis is opening forward, your knees are nice and wide, and you have length within your spine. We're not sitting too low where we have to round in the back in order to support ourselves, in this position. So this is a really nice place to come to just to start with a breathing practice. If seated on the floor feels really uncomfortable for you, if wide knees feels uncomfortable because of any pubic symphysis pain, then sitting cross-legged, I should have said. Sitting on knees is also great, or grabbing for a birth ball or a yoga ball. And so if coming to the floor just is not in the cards for you anymore, then seated on a ball can feel a little bit more accessible and a little bit more comfortable. And same thing, we can have the knees nice and wide. Make sure the ankles are directly underneath the knees so that those joints are supported and stacked. And you can have a little bit of movement side to side, maybe some circles in one direction and then the other. Wherever you're at, we're gonna find some stillness and start tapping into our breath. So close down the eyes, find some height in your spine. Chest is nice and broad, arms are lightly just falling down towards the lap. And as you direct breath into your body, I want it to saturate the pelvis, the pelvic floor, the womb. And then as you exhale, send all of that breath out and then some, emptying out completely, clearing up some space for all fresh oxygen. Again, inhaling from the pelvic floor to the belly, to the rib cage, to the chest. And then exhaling from chest to rib cage to belly. Breathing practice I always like to bring into my yoga practice is called Ujjayi breath, or the victorious breath. It's gonna sound something like this. It's almost like you're huffing or hawing a lot of air on a mirror or on glass, but with your lips sealed. So we're creating a little bit of that texture, a little bit of that heat in the back of the throat, having this oceanic breath or sounding breath. And that can really help us to stay connected to the breath, or when we're not doing our Ujjayi, we realize it, we're like, okay, coming back to the breath, coming back to that baseline. So we'll do a few rounds of that in our seat here. taking your time with it. Letting your thinking mind soften around this practice, this embodiment, and being fully present with what you're engaging with right now. From here, we'll blink the eyes open. This is something I'll usually do anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, but just for the sake of workshopping some of this information, we're gonna flow through a little bit faster than we typically would in a yoga class. So I always like to start in breath. Again, breath can be in a seat on the floor, breath can be on a chair, on a yoga ball. From here, we'll move into child's pose. So same idea, we started with wide knees, and we're gonna keep that wide knee opening because as we talked about in the last video, to open the inlet of the pelvis, we're going to take the wide knees so we can create that opening at the top of the pelvis. So setting up for child's pose, we're going to bring our bolster to the front of the mat. Starting in a seat, you can sit back on your heels and ankles, draw the knees apart. We'll inhale up the spine, and then you're gonna crawl your arms forward. So it's gonna look like this with your bolster. As you crawl forward, your chest and the side of your face are resting down on your bolster. And what your bolster or pillows are doing is it's creating this big opening here for your belly to rest in, just depending on what trimester you're in within your pregnancy, how much your belly and your baby have grown. Maybe you don't need these yet, but if you do needing that space, using this is going to allow you to actually relax into this posture so that you're not having to hold yourself up in a forearm plank in order to make space for your baby. And then we're not having that softening in the shoulders, softening in the upper back. And so as we're here, we're resting forward, closing down the eyes, and maybe you kind of shift in your hips a little bit. You can lengthen your arms up, just creating any kind of movement needed to really feel settled into this shape. And as you breathe, maybe we're imagining that there's pressure coming down on the sacrum, deepening our hips in between our knees, having this nice stretch, maybe at the inner thighs, the inner groin. It'll feel different for everybody, and that's totally fine. So maybe we would stay there again 3 to 5 minutes, maybe longer if that feels good. Sometimes this can feel a little bit intense on your legs or on your knees, a lot of pressure. So maybe you're coming into something where the hips are rising up, something like a puppy pose, right? And so the spine is still long, chest and face are resting down, but we have the hips off of the heels so that there's not as much pressure in the knees. So a lot of different variations that you can do here. The whole aim of these practices is that you're listening to your body and you're engaging in movements that are supporting your continued growth, your continued softening, not having to make it look like anyone else that you've seen do it, anything like that. So child's pose, another great place to come. Will this necessarily feel good during labor? Maybe, maybe not, but it's a great place to come during pregnancy so that we're training the pelvis to create that opening. So next one we have is a supported malasana. Again, we're targeting the inlet of the pelvis, the top of the pelvis, opening at this first ridge. So grabbing for one or both of your blocks, you'll want a good amount of height. Really, me having this little wood block is not going to be high enough for me, so I'm going to show you how you can adjust for that. But what you'll do is you'll sit your block horizontally so that it'll support both of your sits bones. And then you're going to open your feet out into a squat so that your heels are about underneath your knees. Maybe they're a little bit wider. Elbows come to the inside of the knees and hands press in together. So we're really forcing the legs open here in a more effortful stretch. What I'm noticing, like I said, is that because my block is too low and my heels are pretty closely under my knees, I have this rounding in my spine. So we don't want that. We always not always, but most of the time we're looking for length within the spine. So I'm going to walk my feet out a little bit further, find that length from tailbone to crown, and then I'm gonna press my elbows to the inside of my knees. And now you can see my spine is nice and long. I can maybe even walk my feet out a little bit wider because they are a little bit further out. And then you'll again find your breath here. Breathe into the sensation. Continue to elevate and lengthen with each inhale. Maybe you pull the belly forward with each exhale, really deepening into this folding and this lengthening within the top of the pelvis. So again, this is somewhere that you can do before labor. It's a great place to come during labor because we are actively creating that opening. What some people might do is cross at the wrists, hold on to maybe your partner's hand, a doula, whoever you have there with you, and you can kind of pull down on their arms, probably not wanting to go right here, but this will be a really, really nice place for you to get support and stability while enduring kind of a more intense posture. So to get out of this, hands can come behind the thighs and knees, heel toe your feet in, and then shift onto your shin or onto, shift onto your shin. One last thing that I actually want to do for the top of the pelvis are some cat-cows. And so you can do cat-cows with or without a block. You're going to plant your hands underneath the shoulders, knees plant underneath the hips, but maybe they go wider, right? And so I can see, because I have my camera on me, that my hips are stacked over my knees. Sometimes we're a little bit further back, sometimes we're a little too far forward. So make sure that you have this stacking of the joints, even though your knees are set wider than the width of your hips. For cat pose, for cow, we're going to inhale, lift the chest forward, drop the belly slightly, but we're trying to keep the sacrum as flat as we can. A lot of the times in yoga classes at studios, we're seeing this really exaggerated arching, right? We're flipping the tailbone up towards the sky. This is going to create a lot of compression and pressure in your back that you don't want. You probably already have compression in your low back. And so reaching back, keeping the sacrum nice and flat, and then we're having this movement from the mid back and the chest. So we're inhaling forward, exhaling for cat pose, and this is where we can be as exaggerated as we want. We tuck the chin, we tuck the tailbone, we round the spine and the shoulders. And then on an inhale, we float through neutral and then continue to lift through the chest. Exhale, round, exaggerate everything. Inhale, tailbone, chin, and chest rise. Pause at neutral, and then continue on with just the chest. One more time, exhale. And breathe it in. Come into a neutral tabletop. Another variation that you can do here is incorporating your block underneath one knee at a time. So this is going to create a little bit of a twist in the pelvic floor, a little bit of a stretch within those muscles in a somewhat similar way that would happen when you're doing some curb steps. Maybe that's something that's been recommended to you for that pelvic floor softening and lengthening. So what that looks like is super simple. You're going to keep that same alignment with your legs, and you're just going to put that block right underneath your knee. And again, we'll flow through a breath in, a breath out, having the same variation. Maybe your pelvis is tilting up, or your tailbone is flipping up a little bit more on the cow pose with the block under the knee, and that's fine. We're switching over to the other side, flowing through a couple times. And we'll just complete it there. So those are just a few things that you can do to really prepare the top of the pelvis and then ultimately open the top of the pelvis during labor. The next, we're going to look at the mid pelvis. So if you remember again from the last video, when we're talking about the mid pelvis, we are looking at these bones right in here. And we want asymmetrical movement. So lunging one leg forward, one leg back. That's going to create the most distance at this inner part of the mid pelvis. So getting in and out of a lunge is probably going to be one of the most beneficial ways for you to target that specific area. I don't have 2 blocks, so I'm just going to pretend like I have 2 blocks. I would suggest starting at the highest height of whatever you're using. If you're using a book or something that's not an actual block, just make sure you're being very careful that it's not wobbly or unstable so it doesn't slide out from under your grip, right? We just want to keep you safe. So having your hands getting into your tabletop, having your hands on your blocks, this is going to create more space for the front of the body. And then you can inhale the right leg long behind you, hovering that in the air or keeping the toes down to the mat, pressing the heel back, creating some space in the posterior chain of the body, the back line of the body that starts at the bottom of the feet, wraps up the ankle, the calf. All of that is going to continue up to the crown, and that posterior chain is in charge of creating space to unhinge the sacrum. And so finding some stretch there. And then again, we can inhale to hover that leg up, bend into the knee, open your hip to the side, and then carry that leg forward, stepping your foot to the outside of your block in your hand. It might not look like that. If you are extremely pregnant, you're maybe gonna have to swing open, take a step, and then take another step. Maybe come up onto your hands onto your hips and continue to step forward. The more space you have with the front body, the more space you're gonna have to swing the leg forward. So again, take your time, take this in steps, it's totally fine. Starting in our lunge, our ankle is stacked underneath the knee, toes are pointing forward. Right hip pulls back, left hip pulls forward. We're creating this squaring off in the hips. We can tent up on the fingertips at the top of our blocks. Push off, inhale, we rise to a full lunge. Breathing in here for length. Maybe on an exhale, we squeeze the left glute, press the pelvis forward, a little bit of a back bend here. Inhale forward again, rising through the center. And then exhale back down, hands to the floor or to the lower side of your blocks. With your left heel and ankle, turn it to the right side of your mat, walk your hands to the left side of your mat, and then you can draw some circles here with your hip. This is going to feel really good at any stage of labor, any stage of pregnancy, unless you're having some kind of SI joint pain, pubic symphysis pain. But having that asymmetrical lunge is just gonna feel good in your muscles. Your body's carrying more weight than it typically does. I'm gonna show you from the other side so you can see it a little bit better. So just getting right into it, I have my left foot forward now. I'm walking my hands to the right side. My right heel is angling inwards. And now I'm creating those circles and those movements. So this is what it would look like if you're just doing a yoga practice prenatally. If you're actually in labor, then you're probably just holding this during a contraction. That is what's going to be the most effective, is that when you come into certain positions and you're holding it while the contraction is happening, that's when the most change is going to take place. It's not going to feel the most comfortable, but it is what's going to be fairly effective. If you're working with a doula or working with someone who's been trained in prenatal yoga or spinning babies, they're gonna know what positions at what time and for how many contractions in a row are going to create that effective change. So those are just some different, I guess I should name that. That is what's called gate pose. And so gate pose is when our hands are forward, we have one leg lunging out to the side, and then our back ankle can come in for a little bit more stability. We can lunge into it side to side like this, or we can create some circles like that. The way that I did this just now, just by lunging to the side, you can also do that if that feels accessible to you. You don't have to go through the whole motion of being in tabletop and taking all those steps. What else for the mid pelvis? So some kind of twist will also be really nice. So we're gonna get into a half splits. So coming back into your tabletop, keeping the right knee and right shin down. Again, inhale the left leg long, bend your knee, open your hip, swing the left leg forward, landing on the left foot. What I like to do from here is tuck the right toes, lift the right knee, and scoot it back, creating some space so that my knee is further back than my hip right now on the right side. On an inhale, chest presses forward. On an exhale, shift the hips backwards, lengthen in that left leg, and then really dial the right hip forward. Now we can see that my hip and my knee are stacked. I'm creating this length in the back line, the posterior chain of the leg, just like we talked about before. Then from here, your right hand can flatten against your block. You can inhale to reach the left arm up to the side. So this is a twist that should feel fairly accessible, just depending. You have space for your belly on the other side of your leg. With that reach, you're not closing off to the inside of your thigh or anything. But again, if you're having anything in your body telling you this is too much compression, this is too tight, then you can come out of it and readjust as needed. So you'll hold that again, maybe a minute or so, maybe less. To come out of it, you're gonna exhale, return your left hand down to the block. Inhale, chest forward. Exhale, re-lunge to the front of the mat. Hands can come down, or you can come to the lower side of your blocks. Tuck your right toes, lift your right knee, and then scoot that knee forward. Weight in the palms, peel the left leg up or left foot up, send it back, and now we're back in our tabletop. So you can do that for both sides. Another great posture for the mid pelvis is what's called a sideline release. Now to do this in spinning babies, you would be doing this hanging off the edge of a bed. That's not something I'm going to demo for you today, but you can do a modified version of it by lying on the ground. So we're going to do it on the left side right now. You're going to want to set your bolsters to the right side of your mat, and then lower yourself down onto your left side body. I'm going to keep my head up just because I'm demoing, but if you're resting down, I want your head to be down on your forearm, your bicep, or maybe you have another pillow right here underneath. The left leg is extended completely long down the mat, and we are on the left side body. Your bolster or pillows will come to the come towards the midline of your body, and then you're going to bend your right knee at a 90-degree angle. The knee and the ankle joint are both protected and supported on your prop. We don't want one joint hanging off on one side or the other. That's creating misalignment in the body. So there are straight lines from the hip joint to the knee joint to the ankle joint, and then the ankle joint to the toes. So we're crossing this right leg over the body, and then we're resting here on the side. This is a lot more of a passive posture. We're not having to be really effortful or exert a lot of power here, but it is doing a lot for the pelvic floor and for the side of the legs, the back of the legs. So again, this is something that you can do on both sides of the body. And lastly, we will move into something for the outlet of the pelvis. So returning back to our model, the outlet of the pelvis is here between our sits bones and our tailbone. And so we want to create this opening, this unhinging of the sacrum for the end of labor. And what I mentioned in the last video, which again seems a little bit counterintuitive, is we're gonna have our knees together and our ankles apart. Now, intuitively, as we think, what would I do when I push a baby out? I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make a lot of room and I'm gonna squat, and this is what's gonna help my baby come out. As we already saw with the inlet of the pelvis, this kind of position, this kind of deep squat, is opening the top of the pelvis and closing off the bottom of the pelvis. So we're gonna do the opposite for the outlet. So I want you to, again, come into your tabletop, and we're gonna put our knees together and our heels far apart. As you, or if you want to, you can reach back, start to feel for your sits bones, and you can feel how far apart they are here versus when our heels come together and our knees come apart. Again, if you go back and feel, you'll notice your sits bones are much, much closer together. So knees together, heels apart, and you can just rock forward and then backwards. Forwards, inhaling, backwards, exhaling. This is something you can do in a yoga practice or a movement practice now. Again, you can probably feel some of the muscle stretching, tissue stretching. Maybe this feels like a nice relief. We're not usually in positions that mirror this kind of opening or movement. And so, so much of the birthing experience is about muscle memory, getting into positions where your body's like, oh, I know how to release here. I know how to soften and relax here. We don't want to be doing a lot of this stuff for the first time during labor. So you can get into exactly that now, prenatally, and that would be a great place to come during labor as well. What else? That's the most exaggerated one for the outlet of the pelvis. But again, you can also do that on a chair or on a yoga ball, right? So rather than sitting in a big, nice, wide squat like this, making a lot of movement, maybe bouncing forward and then bouncing back, doing your pelvic tilts, you can close the knees in together, keep the heels nice and wide, and then maybe you rock forward and rock back. Rock forward and rock back. And then maybe you could also just hold here, right? And so you can close down the eyes, you can soften in your hands and your arms. And then just allow this stretch to happen, right? There's so much going on in the body right now. You don't always have to be holding yourself up in a lunge or in a crazy posture for there to be some good stuff going on. So I think that's everything. I mean, not everything. There's so much more that you can do. But like I said, this video is really just to workshop a couple things. I want you to all have instruction on how to get in and out certain postures, see how asymmetry, how wide knees affect the pelvis. And once you have this understanding, I want you to take this into a more free flow, using intuitive movement, organic movement, and really start to build that connection that you have with your own body. It knows exactly where it wants to take you, and it can feel kind of awkward doing that sometimes when we haven't done these movements before. So use this as your foundation or as your blueprint, build on top of it, and as always, just let me know if you need to talk about anything more. I hope this helps, and I hope to hear from you. Thanks so much.